You're invited to the premiere of a new and yet ancient play in which you'll be able to re-experience the story of Persephone and Demeter exactly as it was told in the earliest sources. At the heart of this dramatization is the tale of a kidnapped daughter and a mother's desperate attempt to find her. And yet this all too up-to-date scenario embodies one of the most universal of the Greek and Roman myths, in which the ancient world tried to make poetic sense of the seasonal cycle of the crops on which all civilization depends. As in a series of previous productions, you'll hear the actual words of the protagonists in the original Greek and Latin, which in this case are taken from a Homeric hymn and 2 poems by Ovid. Simultaneously, you'll be able to absorb the meaning of those words thanks to the newly composed surtitles and to the projected images of paintings and statues from classical times or from the Renaissance.
Αλλά πάλιν τροπάσται, επεφάος εν νέση θες, τους δε αίτιαν πεντίον καταντεριάσται. Αϊκάρ, δεούτε πάτερ, καί Αθενάιε, καί Άπολον, μέτε τίσουν τρών θάνατον φιούγκοι, χώσο ιεάσι, μέτε της αργέιον, νόην δεγιούμεν όλεθρον. Ο φρόιοι τρώιες ιερά κρέντεμνα λιούμεν.
So, a moving personal drama and a multi-layered myth brought to you through images, surtitles, instrumental music, and the verbal music of Greek and Latin verse delivered with the kind of freedom you'd expect from a living language. The opening scenes are dominated by flowers, the perfect example of beauty in nature, the heralds of spring, and also icons of virginity, making me understand why Botticelli's Primavera is dominated by the figure of Flora, a maiden goddess like Persephone, and herself a fairer flower waiting to be plucked and deflowered. The motif of plucking flowers you'll come to realize you've been given a glimpse into the origins of the most important of the new religions that prepared the ground for Christianity and Islam, the mystery religions of Eleusis, with its initiation ceremonies and its promise that the soul may rise to heaven. Those are just 3 examples of a dozen major themes crisscrossing and leading off in all sorts of directions. And the best analogy I can think of to suggest the richness of the material is the network map of the London Underground. The famous diagram owes its success to its simplification. And I'd like to simplify things even more drastically now and pick out 4 of the busiest lines in our play, each of these lines representing a different way of conceiving life and death, or identity and change. At the center of it all is the circle line that we can associate with the forces of nature and with Demeter as goddess of the crops, where the concept of change is that of going round and round forever, as in the annual cycle of plant life, with sowing, growth and harvest, followed by withering and death. It's the same kind of cycle one finds in the calendar of the liturgical year, be it Christian or Roman. And half of Ovid's lines in our play are taken from his poem called Fasti, in a section dedicated to a week-long festival of Demeter every April. The second way of conceiving change is to think of it as one-way travel, on a line where each intermediate station represents a change of species or a rite of passage, a new start under an old name, a transmutation requiring perhaps the intervention of a god. Think of this central line also as a representation of the structure of Ovid's most famous poem, the Metamorphoses, where the poet tells the story of Demeter again, but with different emphases, stressing the caprice and cynicism of the Olympian gods. The third line in our imaginary network runs from top to bottom and has a definite terminus at each end. It helps us to conceive change as it's experienced by the individual who does not come round again, but has a single ticket from womb to tomb. It corresponds roughly to the world vision in the text which provides our third and biggest source, a Greek poem of about 500 hexameters, known as the Hymn to Demeter, written probably in the 6th century BC. And to these, we might add another merely wished-for line, a line still under construction, from bottom to way off the top, the resurrection line. That is, the hope of a one-way journey up from the tomb to eternal life in some kind of heaven. I hope this diagram will help you find your way around the big themes of the play. But remember that as on the real underground, there are scores of lesser lines running obliquely, offering interchanges, and there are lots and lots of intermediate stations. There's no time here to explain the full mythical meanings of the abduction of Persephone by the king of the underworld, or the terms of the final peace treaty by which she's allowed to return to the upper world for half the year. But I ought to remind you that Demeter is the daughter of the Earth Mother, and that she's the deity to whom mankind owes the benefits of agriculture, that is, the crops, grain above all, which provide the reliable source of food that enabled mankind to stop being hunter-gatherers or pastoral nomads and to live in cities and enjoy civilization. Equally, there's no time to talk about the mysteries of Eleusis. But I ought to make it clear that more than half of the Greek poem is devoted to an explanation of why the principal temple of Demeter was built at Eleusis, modern Elefsina, on the coast just south of Athens. This Greek poem, by the way, uses the same meter as the Homeric epics, and the mood, characterization, and even some of the situations closely recall famous episodes in the Odyssey. And whereas Ovid, Metropolitan Ovid in Augustan Rome, gives prominence to the daughter, the anonymous author of this hymn, writing for a small Greek state some 500 years earlier, concentrates on the human drama of the mother herself, Demeter, her pain, her desperate quest over the world, the long break in her journey at Eleusis, her refusal to consent to a shotgun wedding to legitimate the rape of her daughter, her vengeful destruction of the crops worldwide, and her final reluctant acceptance of the timeshare compromise. There is, however, one last thing I ought to explain about the content and shape of my dramatization, and this can best be done by returning to the diagram of the network. Imagine now a new station, overground, but accessible from our underground, where you can board an express that will whisk you straight to the coast, dive underneath the channel, and re-emerge in a foreign land, in a future age, where you can meet a spiritual descendant of Persephone, another Sicilian princess who has been tragically lost by her parents, taking her name from that loss, who now surfaces at a rustic festival of Demeter, offering flowers of many kinds to her guests. Are you with me? We're going to start our play and establish the mood by reading some famous speeches from Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale, in which Perdita offers flowers of winter to Polixenes, flowers of middle summer to Camillo, and to her lover Florizel, the flowers of spring, such flowers as, frighted, Proserpina let fall from Dis's wagon. In logic, her words ought to form the epilogue, but in the topsy-turvy world of a romance, they'll make a perfect prologue.